Another night in the box. The fog's thickening tonight.
I started working security at the old McAllister distribution warehouse back in 2016. It sat a few miles outside Charleston, right along a stretch of road locals called the Holler Bend, where the fog hung low and the trees leaned in like they were eavesdropping. The company ran overnight shipments for auto parts, but by the time I got hired, most of the operation had slowed to a crawl. Half the place was empty, just dust, metal racks, and the smell of oil that had soaked into the concrete years ago. My shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. I'd clock in, check the locks, and sit in the little security office in front of a bank of monitors that watched over the entire building. The cameras were old, grainy black and white feeds that glitched whenever it rained. Most nights were dead quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Sometimes a stray raccoon would trip the motion sensors, or a trucker would pull in early. But otherwise, it was just me, the monitors, and the sound of my own breathing. You start to lose your sense of time on shifts like that. The dark outside presses against the windows, and you feel like the whole world shrinks down to that tiny room. I'd pass the hours with bad coffee and static from a little radio that barely picked up a signal. Around 3 or 4 in the morning, the silence felt heavier somehow, like the building itself was holding its breath. One night in late November, I noticed something strange on camera 7. It covered the far end of the loading dock, an area we didn't use much anymore since the company downsized. The feed showed what looked like a dark shape standing in the far corner of the dock, facing the wall. It wasn't moving, just standing there. At first, I thought maybe it was a shadow from one of the hanging lights, or maybe some pallets stacked weirdly. The image quality on those cameras was terrible, but after watching for a minute, something about it bothered me. The shape was too tall, too solid, and I realized it wasn't casting a shadow of its own. I radioed the on-call manager, but nobody answered. So I grabbed my flashlight, clipped my radio to my belt, and went to check it out. The warehouse air was cold that night, colder than it should have been. When I opened the door to the loading bay, I could see my breath puff out in front of me. My boots echoed off the concrete as I crossed the empty floor. The corner where the figure had been was bare, nothing there but an old broom and some stains on the wall. I swept the flashlight beam across the dock, half expecting to see someone ducking behind a crate, but it was completely still. Just the hum of the ventilation system and the flicker of a dying overhead bulb. I went back to the office feeling a little stupid. Maybe the feed had glitched again. It wasn't the first time the cameras acted up, but when I sat back down, I froze. The figure was back on the screen, but this time it wasn't in the loading dock. It was standing on camera 3, which pointed directly at the security office. I stared at the monitor, my heart thudding in my chest. The thing was facing the door outside the office, only a few feet from where I sat. I leaned forward, squinting at the grainy feed. The resolution was so bad it was hard to make out details, but the outline looked unmistakably human, tall, motionless, and turned toward the entrance. I glanced at the office door, half expecting to see the handle move. It didn't. Then the monitor flickered. For half a second, the image split into static lines, and when it cleared, the figure was gone. Every other feed stayed steady, except the one that pointed at me. I sat there for a long time trying to shake it off. I told myself maybe it was interference. Maybe the cameras had picked up a reflection or some weird signal. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't stop glancing at the door. Around 3:45, the monitors began to flicker again, one by one. At first, it was just a faint stutter in the image. Then each feed began showing the same thing, me. Every screen displayed a different angle of the security office, but each feed lagged by a few seconds. It was like watching versions of myself, delayed in time. In one feed, I saw myself sitting still, staring at the monitors. In another, my reflection leaned forward, hands gripping the desk. The lag was just long enough that the movement didn't match what I was actually doing. Then I noticed something worse. Each version of me looked wrong. The lighting was off in some feeds, darker, almost shadowed. In others, the shape of my head tilted just slightly at an angle I hadn't moved. One version of me on camera 5 looked straight at the screen and smiled. A wide, slow smile I definitely wasn't making. The sound system started crackling with static. I backed away from the desk, every hair on my body standing on end. The hum of the lights overhead wavered like they were struggling to stay on. I reached up, pulled the main power switch on the monitors, and everything went black. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours, heart pounding, ears straining for any noise outside. That's when I heard it, the soft knock at the security door. It wasn't loud, just 3 gentle taps. But in the quiet, it sounded like a gunshot. I held my breath, staring at the outline of the door, half hoping I'd imagined it. Then it came again, 3 knocks, slow, measured. I didn't move. I couldn't. The door had a small glass window at the top, but from where I sat I couldn't see through it without standing. I thought about using the flashlight, but the idea of shining it and actually seeing something on the other side made my stomach turn. After a minute, the knocks stopped. I waited another 10, then finally turned the monitors back on. They flickered to life one by one, the static clearing into the familiar grayscale feeds. Everything looked normal again. The loading dock, the corridors, the front gate, empty. But then I saw camera 3. The door outside the security office was wide open. I didn't remember hearing it open. I didn't even have a key for the exterior latch. It locked automatically. I stood slowly, every sound in the building suddenly amplified. The buzz of the lights, the creak of my chair, the slow thump of my heartbeat. When I stepped into the hallway, the air was colder than before, almost freezing. I could see my breath again, like I'd stepped into a walk-in freezer. The door to the loading dock hung open, the wind outside pushing it back and forth just slightly. I walked over and shut it, bolting it tight. Then I did another sweep of the cameras, locked every internal door, and stayed in that office until sunrise. When my shift ended, I told the day supervisor about the glitch and the door. He shrugged it off, said the security system was old and overdue for replacement. He didn't even look at the playback footage, just told me to get some rest. I didn't sleep that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape standing behind me on the screen, perfectly still, watching. The next night, I almost called in sick, but I needed the money. So I went back. The air felt heavier that shift, like the building was waiting. I kept every light on in the office and avoided looking at camera 3 for as long as I could. Around 2:30, the monitors began to flicker again. Not violently this time, just a faint distortion across the image. I forced myself to watch. One by one, each feed started to desync again, showing me at the desk, but this time, the delay was longer, 5 seconds behind. I watched myself shift in the chair, rub my eyes, sip my coffee, all on delay. Then one of the feeds, camera 5, stopped matching. The version of me on screen didn't move at all. It just sat perfectly still, head tilted slightly to one side, staring directly at the lens. A cold sweat broke across my skin. I moved my hand slowly in front of my face. The figure on the screen didn't copy it. It just kept staring. Then on camera 7, I saw it again. The dark figure in the corner of the loading dock. Same spot as before, facing the wall. Only now, something was different. There were smudges, handprints, faint but visible, on the concrete wall right in front of it. I switched to camera 3. The office door behind me was cracked open again. My throat went dry. I turned around slowly, every muscle tight. The door was open just an inch, enough for a sliver of darkness to show through. I stepped toward it, hand trembling as I reached for the handle. Then through the crack I heard breathing. Not mine. It was slow, shallow, like someone standing inches away from the door. I froze, heart hammering in my ears. Then, from the monitors behind me, I heard static shift into a voice, a whisper, barely audible but sharp enough to make every muscle in my body lock. It said my name. I slammed the door shut and bolted it. I didn't leave that office for the rest of the night. By dawn, when the first sunlight hit the windows, the temperature finally began to rise again. I went through the morning routine, signed the log, and went straight to my car. When I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat. Nothing, just my pale face and dark circles under my eyes. I quit 2 days later. I didn't bother giving notice, but before I left, I stopped by the office to drop off my badge. The day supervisor was there, yawning and half asleep. I asked if the new guard had started yet. He said yeah, some guy they transferred from another branch. He nodded toward the monitors and said, "He's already watching the feeds." I glanced at the screens. The cameras showed the same static-filled hallways, the loading dock, the office. and then I froze. On camera 3, I saw the new guard sitting at the desk. And standing right behind him, facing the wall, was that same dark shape. I didn't say a word. I just walked out of that building, got in my car, and never went back. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about those monitors. About the delay, the wrong versions of myself, the thing that somehow moved when I didn't. And I wonder, if it wasn't on the cameras anymore, where did it go? Because every now and then, when I pass a mirror or catch my reflection in a dark window, I swear. For just a split second, it moves before I do. I was never supposed to take that shift. It was supposed to go to Donnie, older guy, been at the company longer. But he'd called out sick, and my supervisor asked if I could cover. The site was an old shopping complex out near Kanawha City, built sometime in the late 70s, and from what I'd been told, it had been half abandoned for years. The top floors still held a few offices and a thrift store that clung on through sheer stubbornness. But everything below ground had been sealed off after a burst pipe caused flooding a few winters back. The building was scheduled for demolition in a few months. Until then, our job was just to keep vagrants out and make sure nobody got hurt wandering through the place. Easy work, I thought. Quiet, boring, and paid well enough for the hours. I remember the first time I walked into that building. The air inside felt wrong, stale in a way that didn't make sense. Even when the doors opened to the outside, it stayed thick, heavy. The kind of air that sits too long on old concrete and dust. During the day, with sunlight coming through the skylights, it almost looked normal. But at night, everything changed. The light disappeared faster than it should have, swallowed whole by shadows that didn't seem natural. That basement was the worst part. The elevators didn't work, so you had to take the old service stairs tucked behind the loading area. The concrete walls were painted this awful shade of green, like a hospital corridor from another era. It smelled like mildew, rust, and something faintly metallic, like blood that had dried years ago but never fully washed away. They told me not to bother with the cameras down there. They never work right, my supervisor said. The wiring's shot. If something goes wrong, just check it yourself. I didn't like the way he said that, like he knew the place had its own kind of temperament. My first couple of nights were uneventful. I'd start my rounds around midnight, walk the length of the first and second floors, check the locks, jot notes in the logbook, then loop back through the stairwell. Every time I passed that basement door, though, I'd catch myself glancing down through the window at the top of the stairs. You couldn't see much, just the landing and the first few steps fading into black, but it always looked like something might be standing just beyond the edge of the light. The fifth night was when everything started. Around 1:30 a.m., the lights flickered throughout the building, then went dark for a few seconds before the backup generator kicked on. The radio crackled and my supervisor's voice came through, faint and distorted. He said the outage had hit only the lower levels. "Go check the breakers in the basement," he told me. "They're probably just tripped again." I hesitated. I didn't like that basement, and everyone who'd worked here before had said the same thing. How it always stayed colder than the rest of the building. How you could hear things down there that didn't echo right. But I didn't want to look like a coward, so I grabbed my flashlight and started down the stairs. The door groaned when I opened it, the kind of long, hollow sound that feels like it belongs to something alive. My boots clanged against the steps, the beam from my flashlight trembling as I went deeper. The concrete walls were wet in places, glistening with condensation. The air got colder with every step until I could see my breath. At the bottom, the corridor stretched in both directions. My light barely reached the far end, where the hallway curved out of sight. I called out a quick maintenance, just in case anyone else had gone down there before me, but my voice came back doubled, like something further ahead was repeating me. But just a split second too late, I started walking. My flashlight beam cut through floating dust, catching bits of debris, broken tiles, chunks of plaster, a crumpled, wet floor sign half buried in grime. Then, about 20 feet in, I stopped. There were footprints in the dust. At first, I thought they were mine, until I realized they were too small. Bare feet, the prints were fresh, outlined clearly in the thick layer of gray. They started just ahead of me and led down the left corridor, toward the old maintenance room. I felt my stomach twist. There weren't supposed to be kids down here. There weren't supposed to be anyone. The main entrances were padlocked, and I'd just come down the only stairwell. I followed them anyway. My radio crackled once as I turned the corner, but all I heard was static. The deeper I went, the worse the smell became. Damp concrete, rust, and something else. Something that reminded me of a flooded crawlspace I'd once helped clean out, where a dead raccoon had been sitting in the water for weeks. When I reached the maintenance room, the door was hanging slightly open. A faint drip echoed inside, steady and rhythmic, like a clock ticking underwater. I nudged the door with my boot, and it swung inward with a soft metallic scrape. The beam from my flashlight hit the far wall first. Rusted shelves, old tools, a mop bucket overturned in the corner. Then it passed over something standing upright near the back, a tall cracked mirror leaning against the wall. Its surface was smeared with grime, fractured down the middle like a lightning bolt. I stepped inside slowly, the sound of dripping water the only thing breaking the silence. The footprints led straight to the mirror and stopped right in front of it. I remember the way the air felt. It was heavier here, pressing against me like humidity, even though it was freezing cold. I lifted the flashlight higher, trying to see my reflection through the dirt. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing behind me in the mirror. He wasn't moving, just standing there, a few feet back. He looked gray, not like his clothes, but like his skin. Thin face, hollow eyes, his mouth slightly open like he'd been caught mid-breath. I froze. My first thought was that someone had followed me down here, maybe a squatter or one of the demo crew. I turned around, the light cutting through the room, but there was no one there, empty. I turned back to the mirror. The man was still there, closer now. He wasn't standing behind me anymore. He was right over my shoulder in the reflection. The edge of his face barely visible in the beam of light, his expression twisted, eyes sunken and too dark. My chest locked up. The flashlight started shaking in my hand. I could hear breathing now, slow, wet, and steady, but it wasn't coming from me. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered against the concrete and rolled, spinning the beam across the walls. The reflection warped and broke across the cracks in the glass. But in that split second before the light hit the floor, I saw something that's never left me. The man in the mirror leaned forward and whispered something. I couldn't make out the words, just the shape of his lips moving. Then, as the light fell away completely, it felt like someone brushed past me, cold and solid. I didn't think. I just ran. My boots pounded against the hallway floor, echoing through the concrete like gunshots. The corridor seemed longer than before, like it kept stretching ahead no matter how fast I moved. I didn't stop until I hit the stairwell door and shoved it open, slamming it behind me. I climbed those steps 2 at a time and didn't breathe until I reached the first floor. When I looked down at my hands, they were trembling. My flashlight had cracked where it hit the ground, but it still worked. I checked it again and again, just to have something to focus on. When I went back to the office, I tried explaining what happened. The supervisor just stared at me, half asleep behind the desk. "You probably saw your own reflection," he said. "Those mirrors down there are warped." He told me to take the rest of the night off, and I didn't argue. But as I was leaving, I passed the camera monitors mounted on the wall. Most of them showed static, but a few still worked. Grainy, black and white, barely holding signal. I glanced at the basement feed, even though I knew I shouldn't. For a second I saw the corridor, the same one I'd just run through. Then, at the very end of the hallway, just before it curved out of view, I saw a figure standing there. Tall, unmoving, facing the camera. The screen flickered, and he was gone. I quit 2 nights later. They sent another guy to cover the rest of the shifts. His name was Daniel. He was younger than me, tougher, didn't believe in ghost stories. On his 3rd night, he stopped answering the radio. They found him the next morning sitting on the basement steps, flashlight on, eyes wide open. He wouldn't talk about what happened, not to anyone. They said he just kept mumbling something about a reflection that wasn't his. A few weeks later, the company shut the site down for good. They fenced it off, locked the gates, and posted demolition notices. The whole place came down that spring, but sometimes when I drive past where the complex used to stand, I get this strange feeling, like I can still hear water dripping somewhere below me, echoing up through the ground. And once, stopped at the light near the old access road, I caught my reflection in the side mirror of my car. For just a second, it looked like there was someone standing behind me. Gray, thin, and breathing slow. Worked night security at a private hospital just outside Beckley, West Virginia. It sat on a hill above the town, a sprawling brick complex that looked more like an old boarding school than a medical facility. The place had been around since the 1950s, rebuilt and expanded so many times that its hallways no longer made sense. You could walk in a straight line and somehow end up back where you started. The day shift guards used to joke that the hospital was haunted, but I didn't buy into that stuff. I'd done night security for years, warehouses, schools, even an old prison once. You see enough empty buildings after dark, your mind starts playing tricks. That's all it ever was, I told myself. Tricks. My shifts ran from 11 to 7. It was simple work: monitor the cameras, patrol the halls, make sure nobody slipped in or out. The only rule they gave me on my first night was to stay out of the West Wing. Flood damage, my supervisor said. That section's been sealed for years. You'll see it on the monitors, but don't bother checking it in person. The West Wing didn't look like much from the outside. Just a dark corridor behind a set of double doors, chained shut with a padlock. The walls beyond were stained, yellow from water damage, and the lights inside had long since burned out. But even from the first night, that part of the hospital gave me a bad feeling. The cameras there were half dead, flickering, static-filled, sometimes showing motion that wasn't really there. I remember once seeing what looked like a person standing at the end of the hallway, completely still. The image was so grainy it could have been anything, but it stuck with me. Most nights, though, were quiet. I'd do my rounds, ER first, then maternity, then up to the surgical floors. Hospitals at night are strange places. They don't sleep exactly. Machines beep softly, vents hum, nurses whisper in break rooms. There's this constant low noise that fills every corner. But when you walk through alone, all that sound fades into something else. Something that feels like breathing. One night, maybe a month into the job, I was watching the monitors around 2A. The halls were empty, and I was fighting to stay awake. Then, out of nowhere, motion triggered on one of the cameras, the West Wing feed. I leaned forward, thinking it was a glitch again. The footage stuttered, static crawling across the screen. Through the distortion, I could just make out a door swinging open near the middle of the hallway, one that shouldn't have been able to open at all. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then something passed by the camera, a blur, faint but unmistakably human-shaped. I called it in over the radio, expecting to hear my supervisor answer from the front desk. Nothing. I tried again, switching channels, even tapped the side of the radio, but it only hissed back static. I told myself it had to be a false alarm. Maybe a maintenance worker forgot to log out. Maybe the camera finally shorted out. Either way, I couldn't ignore it. So I grabbed my flashlight and started toward the West Wing. The hospital was unusually quiet that night. Even the air vents seemed to hum lower, like the building itself was listening. When I reached the double doors, the padlock was still there, hanging loose on its chain, but the doors were open just enough for a sliver of cold air to seep through. The smell hit me first. Damp, moldy, thick like the inside of a flooded basement. My flashlight beam caught the edge of a wheelchair just inside, overturned on its side. The wheels creaked as I stepped closer, the sound echoing down the long, dark hall. I called out, "Security? Anyone back here?" My voice disappeared into the stillness. No answer. The floor squelched under my boots, water pooling in shallow dips. The ceiling above dripped steadily, plop, 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 each drop hitting the ground with the rhythm of a heartbeat. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and every few feet, a sign still hung crooked, "Patient Recovery, Nurse Station B, Intensive Care." As I walked deeper, I passed an old nurse's desk, papers scattered across it like someone had just left mid-shift and never came back. The ink had bled from water damage, blurring the names and notes into nonsense. That's when I heard it, the faint creak of a gurney wheel somewhere ahead. I froze, holding my breath. The sound was slow, uneven, like someone pushing a stretcher down the hall with one bad wheel. I swept the flashlight beam forward, but the hall curved, and I couldn't see where it led. "Hello?" I called again. My voice cracked this time. "You're not supposed to be down here." The gurney noise stopped. Then came footsteps, soft ones, barefoot by the sound of it. The light trembled in my hand as I aimed it toward the sound. The hallway was empty, just water stains and old equipment left to rot. I started backing up, one step at a time, keeping the light pointed forward. I'd made it halfway back to the nurse's station when I heard it. A voice. "You're late." It was barely louder than a whisper, but it carried through the hall like it came from everywhere at once. I spun around, shining the light behind me. Nothing there. My chest tightened. The smell of mold was stronger now, like it was being forced into my lungs. I turned back toward the doors, ready to get the hell out. That's when the light caught something on the floor. A small piece of plastic half buried in the grime. I bent down and brushed it off with my glove. It was a name badge. Mine, same photo, same name. Only the date printed on the corner was 3 years earlier. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my brain refusing to make sense of what I was holding. Then I heard the gurney again, closer this time. The sound echoed just around the bend of the hallway. I ran. My boots splashed through the water, the beam of my flashlight jerking wildly over the walls. The hallway behind me filled with sound, the clatter of wheels, the shuffle of feet, and that voice again, whispering, "You're late. You're late." When I reached the double doors, they were closed. The padlock hung open, the chain tight around the handles. I dropped the badge, fumbled with the lock, and yanked it free. The doors burst open and I stumbled into the main corridor, slamming them shut behind me. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Everything was silent again. When I finally looked up, I noticed the camera mounted above the West Wing doors. Its little red light was on, meaning it was live. I turned toward the security office, half running, desperate to check the feed. When I pulled up the footage, my heart sank. The monitor showed the West Wing hallway, empty. No footsteps, no gurney, no sign of movement. But lying just inside the doorway was the same name badge I'd dropped. The one that wasn't supposed to exist. Then the feed glitched. For a single frame, the hallway filled with motion. Blurry shapes, like people standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the camera. Then static. The screen went black. I sat there until sunrise, staring at that monitor, unable to move. When the morning staff arrived, I handed in my badge and told them I was done. I didn't even bother collecting my last paycheck. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the hospital's history. There'd been a flood in 2013, bad enough to shut down the entire West Wing. The report said the backup generator failed, and power went out for nearly 12 hours. Several patients in intensive care had died, trapped on life support machines that never came back online. The hospital never reopened that section. Too much damage, they said. Too much cost to repair. But what got me wasn't the flood or the deaths. It was a list I found buried in the state records, a roster of security contractors who'd worked for the hospital that year. My name was on it, same spelling, same photo ID number, but next to my name was a note in red ink. Deceased found in West Wing. Presumed electrical accident. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's a clerical mistake. Maybe it's just old paperwork that never got updated. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that voice. Soft, patient, echoing from somewhere just out of sight. You're late.